Good day everyone. Today our group is going to tackle about the controversies and conflicting views about the site of the first mass. Today's report will include the historical background of the controversy, authors or proponents' quick biography, discussion of the varying viewpoints, and conclusion. With that being said, we ask all of you to give your full attention to our first reporter, Mr. Manuel.
Before we start, here are some historical background. During the pre-colonial period, animism was widely practiced and early Filipinos believed that the world is inhabited by spirits and supernatural entities that we must pay respect through worship. Roman Catholicism was first introduced to the early Filipinos by the time Magellan and his men first arrived in the Philippines. Magellan ordered a mass to celebrate, which was the first Holy Mass that marked the birth of Roman Catholicism in the Philippines. It was officiated by Father Pedro Valderrama, which leads to Roman Catholicism to become the dominant religion in the Philippines. The controversy. Historians have found various accounts that contradict when compared with each other, creating a controversy specifically with the information of where the exact location of which the first Holy Mass in the Philippines was held. This particular controversy has been disputed by countless historians, and even the people throughout the years, decades even, making us all wonder, where did the first Holy Mass of the Philippines take place? Some wonder that the first Holy Mass was held in Butuan, and the others say it was in Limasawa. So, where did the first Catholic Mass take place in the Philippines? Butuan has long been believed as the site of the first Mass. In fact, this has been the case for 3 centuries, culminating in the erection of a monument in 1872 near the Agusan River, which commemorates the expedition's arrival and celebration of Mass on April 8, 1521. The Butuan claim has been based on a rather elementary reading of primary sources from the event. Toward the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century, a more nuanced reading of the available evidence was made, which brought more light to more considerations in going against the more accepted interpretation of the first Mass in the Philippines.
Good day, my name is James Christianmanuel, and to start off with my part, I will discuss the 2 primary sources the historian refers to identify the first Mass in the Philippines. First is the log kept by Francisco Albo. Francisco Albo joined the Magellan expedition as a pilot in Magellan's flagship called the Trinidad. He was one of the 18 survivors who returned with Sebastian Elcano on the Victoria after having circumnavigated the world. Second is the account of Pigafetta, or the first voyage around the world. Pigafetta, like Albo, was a member of the Magellan expedition and an eyewitness of the event, particularly called the First Mass. I will now discuss one of the primary sources called Albos's log. Albos began keeping his own diary, and it was merely a logbook, while he was on the voyage out while they were sailing southward. On the 16th of March, year 1521, as they sailed a westerly course from Landrones, they saw land toward the northwest. However, they did not land there owing to many shallows, so they did not approach it. They later found out that the name of that island was Yunaga. Instead, on that same day, they went towards another small island called the Suluan, and there they anchored. They saw some canoes, but those canoes fled at the approach of the Spaniards. This island was at 9 2/3 degrees north latitude. After that, they sailed westward to an uninhabited island of Gada, where they took in a supply of food and water. The sea around that island was free from shallows. Albo does not give the latitude of this island, but from Pigafetta's testimony, this island seems to be the Aquata, or Homonhon, at 10 degrees north latitude. And then they sailed westward towards a large island named the Ceylani. This island was inhabited and was known to have gold. Ceylani, or as Pigafetta calls it, Ceylon, was the island of Leyte. Sailing southwards along the coast of that large island of Ceylani, they turned southwest to a small island called the Mazaua. That island could also be found at latitude of 9 and 2/3 degrees north. The people of that island of Mazaoa were very good. There the Spaniards planted a cross upon a mountain top, and from there they were shown 3 islands to the west and southwest, where they were told that there was much more gold. They showed how the gold was gathered, which came in small pieces like peas and lentils. And next, from Mazava, they sailed northwards again towards Ceylani. They followed the coast of Ceylani in a northwesterly direction, ascending up to 10 degrees of latitude, where they saw 3 small islands. After Ceylani, from there they sailed westward some 10 leagues, and there they saw 3 islets, where they dropped anchor for the night. In the morning they sailed southwest some 12 leagues down to a latitude of 10 and 1/3 degree. There they entered a channel between 2 islands, one of which was called Matan and the other Subu. The town of Subu was on an east-west direction with the islands of Suluan and Mazava, but between Mazava and Subu there were so many shallows that the boats could not go westward directly, but had to go, as the voyagers did, in a roundabout way. The first Catholic Mass will take place on the island of Mazava. Based on geographical facts, the island of Mazava is located at the southernmost point of Leyte, with a latitude of 9 degrees and 54 minutes north. It will also describe the event's planting of a cross at the summit of the 3 islands, which can be seen from the west and southwest. It completely characterizes the Limasawa site rather than the Butuan coast. And then, such is Salvo's testimony. The island that he calls Gada seems to be the Aquada of Pigafetta, namely the island of Amonhon, where they took in supplies of water and wood. The large island of Ceylani, which they coasted, is the island of Leyte. Coasting southwards along the eastern coast of that island, then turning southwest, they came upon a small island named Mazava, which lies at a latitude of 9 and 2/3 degrees north. That fits the location of the small island of Limasawa, south of Leyte. The island's southern tip is at 9 degrees and 54 minutes north. It can also be noted that Albo does not mention the first Mass, but only the planting of the cross upon a mountain top, from which the 3 islands could be seen to the west and southwest. This also fits the southern end of Limasawa. It does not fit the coast of Butuan, from which no islands could be seen to the south or the southwest, but only towards the north.
Good day everyone, my name is Sudal Bihugo and I will continue our reporting on parts of examining the evidence from Pigafetta. But first, who is Antonio Pigafetta? Antonio Pigafetta was an Italian scholar and explorer. He joined the expedition led by Ferdinand Magellan to the Spice Island, wherein he was an assistant of Magellan and served as an official chronicler of that said expedition. He was one of the 18 survivors who returned to Spain. That's why he has the most complete account of Magellan's expedition, entitled The First Voyage Around the World. So now let's continue. In examining the evidence from Pigafetta, we shall consider the following points. First, Pigafetta's testimony as regard the route taken by the expedition from Pacific Ocean to Cebu, which will be reported by yours truly. Second, the evidence of Pigafetta's map, which will be reported by Greg Enrico Bron, and the presence of 2 native kings, which will be reported by Christian Burigas, and the events of the 7 days at the island of Masawa, which will be reported by Greg Enrico Bron. And lastly, an argument from omission, which will be reported by Jolo Gonzalez. So we come now to primary source, Pigafetta's testimony on the route of Magellan's expedition. This regarded the route taken by the expedition from Pacific Ocean to Cebu as by Pigafetta's testimony. So, Saturday, March 16, 1521, at, exact, at exactly 501 years ago at daybreak, Magellan's expedition sighted a highland named Samal, which was now known as Samar, which was some 300 leagues westward of Ladrones Island, now known as Marianas. On Sunday, March 17, the following day, after deserting Samal Island, they landed on another island which was uninhabited, and which lay to the right of the above-mentioned island of Samal. To the right here would mean on their starboard going south on south or southwest. That was named Homono or Homonhon, and located at 10 degrees north latitude. And to add, um, Homono, which Pigafetta referred to as watering place of good signs, for the reason that the said place is abundant with gold. So still on Sunday, March 17, Magellan named the entire archipelago the island of Saint Lazarus by the reason that it was the Sunday in Lenten season when the gospel assigned for the mass in the liturgical office was 11th chapter of Saint John, which tells of raising of Lazarus from the dead. On Monday, March 18, 1521, in the afternoon of their second day on that island, they saw a boat coming towards them with 9 men in it, and an exchange of gifts was takes place. Um, this also marked as the first human contact of Filipino with Europeans, giving sign of joy because of their arrival. So in that exchange, Magellan asked for food supplies, and after that the men went away and promising to bring rice and other supplies in 4 days. And there were two springs of water on that island of Amonhon. Also, they saw there's some indication that there was gold in this island. Consequently, Magellan renamed the island and called it the watering place of good omen, which I was mentioned earlier, or the Aqua della Divina Segnale. And after 4 days, Friday, March 22, at noon, the natives returned, and Magellan's expedition stayed 8 days at Omanhon. And on Monday, March 25, in the afternoon, the expedition weighed anchored and left the island of Omanhon. And the route taken by the expedition after leaving the Omanhon was toward the west-southwest between the four islands, namely Sinalo, Hunanghan, Ibuson, and Albarian. And in the morning of Holy Thursday, March 28, they anchored off an island where the previous night they had seen a light or bonfire, and this island was still on Masawa. They remained 7 days on Masawa Island. This part will be broadly explained by Greg. And on Thursday, April 4, they left Masawa bound to Cebu. At Gatighan, they sailed westward to the three islands of Camotes Group, namely Poro, Pasihan, and Ponson. From Camotes Island, they sailed southwestward toward Subu. And at noon on Sunday, 7th of April, they entered the harbor of Subu. And all in all, it takes them 3 days to negotiate the journey from Masawa northwards to Camotes Island and then southwards to Cebu. And that was the route of Magellan's expedition as stated in the account of Pigafetta. Our next part will be reported by Christian Burigas, which is the presence of the two native kings.
Another point to consider is the presence of two native kings during the first Mass. One was the king of Mazawa, who later guided Magellan's expedition to Cebu, and the other was a relative, namely the king or Raha of Butuan. More on this particular individual later. However, at the moment, the relevant fact is that he was a visitor of Mazawa. His territory was Butuan, which was on another island. That island of his was called Butuan and Calagan. When those kings wished to see one another, they both went hunting on that island where they are, which was Mazawa, where they stayed for 7 days. Therefore, Mazawa could not have been Butuan.
The evidence of Pigafetta's map. Pigafetta's map of Mazawa in the French Navy Libre Philippines by Nekiel Codex, one of three French extant manuscripts of Antonio Pigafetta's account of the first circumnavigation. The facsimile book was published by Yale University in 1986. The cross west of Mazawa, indicating the location where Magellan's fleet anchored and is repeated in all French manuscripts. So are the stilt houses facing a cove. Of 23 charts in the Yale Codex and in all other codices, this is the only one where the scrolls for place names are empty. It does tell us Pigafetta himself didn't have a hand in its execution. This map is from the companion facsimile book to the Englishman tailored by R. A. Skelton. Marzawa is a small island that lies off the southwestern tip of the large island which is now called Southern Leyte and is to the east of the island of Bohol. It lies near to the passage between Bohol and the western coast of Ceylon. The island of Marzawa in Pigafetta's map therefore lies roughly to the actual position of the island of Limasawa. In no way can Marzawa be identified with Butuan, which is situated in another and much larger island which is of today is Mindanao, the same island in which Calagan, Sipit, and Malandanao are located. Next is Pigafetta in the 7 days in Mazawa. Here we will talk about the events of the 7 days at the island of Mazawa. Holy Thursday, March 28. The Spanish anchored near the island and a small boat carrying 8 natives to whom Magellan threw some trinkets. In that same day, in the afternoon, the Spanish weighed anchor and came closer to the shore near the native king's village. 29th March, Holy Friday. Magellan sent his slave interpreter to ask the king about food supplies, and he also said that they come as a friend and not as enemies. The king and his 6 or 8 men went up to Magellan's ship, and the 2 men embraced. Another exchange of gifts was made. When they returned, they brought 2 members of Magellan's expedition as guests. 30th of March. Pigafetta and his companions spent the previous evening feasting and drinking with the native king and his son. Pigafetta and his companion took leave of their host and returned to the ships. 31st March, Sunday. Early in the morning, Magellan sent the priest with some men to prepare the mass. Later in the morning, Magellan landed with 50 men and mass was celebrated. Magellan and the Spaniards returned to the ship for the noonday meal. In the afternoon, they returned to plant the cross on the summit of the highest hill. Both at the mass and the planting of the cross were the king of Mazawa and the king of Butuan. Summit of the highest hill. Magellan then said that he wished to go to Cebu and to depart the following the morning. The king of Mazawa said that he would contact Magellan to Cebu, but he would first have to bring the harvest in. He asked Magellan to send him men to help with the harvest. April 1st. No work was done because the 2 kings were sleeping off their drinking bout the night before. The 2nd and 3rd April, Tuesday and Wednesday, the work was being done on the harvest. In the 4th of April, Thursday, the Spanish left Mazawa bound for Cebu.
An argument from omission. If Mazwa were Butuan or in the vicinity of Butuan, there is a curious omission in Pigafetta's account which would be difficult to explain. Butuan is a riverine settlement. It is situated on the Agusan River. The beach called Meseo is in the delta of that river. If the Magellan expedition were at that delta, and if the Mass were celebrated there, why is there no mention of the river? Later on, after Magellan's death, and after Cebu debacle, the survivors of his expedition went to Mindanao and it seems actually went up to Butuan. Pigafetta describes quite vividly a trip up the river to see the Queen, but that was after Magellan's death. 40 years later, members of Legazpi expedition visited Butuan, and the river anchorage forms a very important part of their account. The fact that there is no mention of the river significant fact in Pigafetta's account of the 7-day stay at the Mazua. We must therefore take him literally. Mazua was an island surrounded by sea, not a river delta. The evidence from Pigafetta, the most complete account of the Magellan expedition, is that the Antonio Pigafetta, entitled Primo Viago in Tomo al Mundo, First Voyage Around the World. Like Albo, he was a member of the expedition and therefore an eyewitness of the principal events which he describes, including the first mass in the what is now known the Philippine archipelago, but which Magellan called the islands of St. Lazarus. Pigafetta's work, there are two excellent English translations, one by Robertson from the Italian and another by Skelton from the French. Pigafetta was among the 18 survivors who returned to Spain with a canoe. Aboard the Victoria, Pigafetta tried to interest Charles V of Spain in his account of the voyage. When no interest was shown, he returned to Italy and there wrote a fuller account from his day-to-day notes, which he entitled Primo Viago in Tolmo al Mundo, the first voyage around the world. His plans for publication failed. But a French translation in summary form appeared in Paris in 1525 and Italian retranslated from the French in 1536. Ramusio included Pigafetta's account in his Daily Navigation at Viago, which first appeared in Venice in 1550 and was reprinted many times thereafter. Pietro Martir di Angera included Pigafetta's account in his own collection, which translated into English and published into London in 1555. Several manuscripts of Pigafetta's works exist. Of one of considered most authentic is the Ambrosian Codex in Milan. The manuscript was published in its Italian text in 1894. What James Alexander Robertson did, however, was remarkable. Instead of merely translating from the printed text of 1894, Robertson went back to original manuscript and reprinted the Ambrosian Codex. Together with his translation, Robertson's work appeared in a limited edition in 3 volumes at Cleveland in 1906. The pertinent section in Pigafetta's account is that the part in which he narrates the event from 16th of March and at 1521, when they first sighted the island of the Philippine group, up to 7th of April, when the expedition landed at Cebu. That was a period of approximately 3 weeks.
Summary of the evidence of Albo and Pigafetta, taking the evidence of Albo's logbook together with that from Pigafetta's account. Number 1. Magellan's expedition entered Philippine waters south of the island of Samar and dropped anchor at Hamonhon, where they stayed a week. Then they sailed westward towards Leyte and then southwards parallel to the eastern coast of that island and that of the adjoining island of Panaon. Rounding the southern tip of the latter, they anchored off the eastern shore of a small island called Mazawa. There they stayed a week, during which on Easter Sunday, they celebrated Mass and planted the cross on the summit of the highest hill. Number 2. The island of Mazawa lies at a latitude of 9 2/3 degrees north. Its position, south of Leyte, and its latitude corresponds to the position and latitude of the island of Limasawa, whose southern tip lies at 9 degrees and 54 minutes north. Number 3. From Mazawa, the expedition sailed northwestwards through the Canigao Channel between Bohol and Leyte, then northwards parallel to the eastern coast of this latter island. Then they sailed westward to the Camotes group and from there southwestward to Cebu. Number 4. At no point in that itinerary did the Magellan expedition go to Butuan or any other point on the Mindanao coast. The survivors of the expedition did go to Mindanao later but after Magellan's death. Number 5. The Legazpi Expedition. There is confirmatory evidence from the documents of the Legazpi expedition, which sailed into Philippine waters in 1565, 44 years after Magellan. Confirmatory evidence from the Legazpi expedition. The Legazpi expedition. There is confirmatory evidence from the documents of the Legazpi expedition, which sailed into Philippine water in 1565, 44 years after Magellan. Legazpi and his pilots were anxious to visit was precisely Mazawa, and they inquired about Mazawa from Kamutoan and his companions, natives of the village of Canadian at the southeastern end of the island of Leyte. Guided by these natives, the Legazpi ships rounded the island of Panae, or Panaon, which was separated from Leyte by a narrow strait and anchored off Mazawa. But they found the inhabitants to be hostile, apparently as a result of Portuguese depredation that had occurred in the 4-decade interval between Legazpi and the Magellan expedition. From Mazawa, they went to Camiguing, which was visible from Mazawa, and from there, they intended to go to Butaan on the island of Mindanao, but were driven instead by contrary winds to Bohol. The point seems clear that as pilots of the Legazpi expedition understood it, Mazawa was an island near Leyte and Panaon. Butuan was on the island of Mindanao. The two were entirely different places and in no wise identical. Conclusion. Moreover, the National Historical Institute or NHI have strongly asserted the provisions of Republic Act 2733 that the first Holy Mass was indeed solemnized in Limasawa Island, and the only valid and reliable primary source were Antonio Pigafetta's narratives. National Historical Institute has strengthened the claim on Limasawa Leyte. Serafin D. Quiazon, National Historical Institute Chairman and Executive Director, apprised on March 1, 1994 that the approved Republic Act No. 7822 or the Act declaring Limasawa Island in the province of Southern Leyte a tourist zone, supports and vindicates that the first Mass was celebrated on March 31, 1521 in the island of Limasawa and not in Butuan City. The account of Pigafetta entitled The First Voyage Around the World was deemed to be authentic primary source that provides substantial evidences. What is Republic Act No. 2733 and Republic Act No. 7822? Republic Act No. 2733, declared on June 19, 1960, it is an act to declare the site of Magallanes Limasawa Island in the province of Leyte, where the first Mass in the Philippines was held as a national shrine, to provide for the preservation of historical monuments and landmarks thereat and for other purposes, while Republic Act No. 7822, where in Section 1, Limasawa Island in the province of Southern Leyte is hereby declared a tourist zone. As such, it shall be accorded priority development by the Department of Tourism and shall be subject to rules and regulations governing the development of tourist zones.
And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Hope we all learned something, and on behalf of Group 1, we sincerely appreciate your attention today.